Welcome to The Blast. I'm John Pritchett, and we have our first special guest, although he's on the inside, Darren Lucas. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks for being here, Darren.
Great to be here, guys.
So this is the third episode. The first one was an introduction to what the heck is BOA, a little bit of background on Hank and how we came together. Last week we talked a little bit about my background, and then we got into some specific issues about, you know, what is a startup company doing? What are we focused on this week? And we're going to kind of continue that this week and talk about some of the things we're working on. But we thought we would start having people join us who have been part of helping us launch BOA. And Darren was one of the very first people from the outside who came in and got involved and has taken on a big role as kind of our chief revenue officer. And Darren, I thought it would be great if you could just sort of start by giving us a little bit of the background, and then I'm going to ask you about, you know, how what your reaction was when you first heard about BOA, and then we'll talk about some of the things that you're helping us do.
Let me say one thing first. We talked so much last week about building the team and the importance of building the team, and Darren was the first guy that really joined the team, so it's fitting that he's the first guest we have on the show, so glad to be.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your background, Darren.
Well, I like being first, Hank. So, and for a guy who went to North Carolina, we like to be first a lot. So, try to stay away from me.
Here we go.
Stay away from the Clemson and the South Carolina. No, look, it's been a fun ride for over more than a year now. But look, I've sports guy my whole life, and growing up in small town of Clinton, North Carolina, you know, as small as it was, you had a lot of people who worked in college athletics. We had Terry Holland, was head basketball coach at Virginia. You had Bobby Purcell, was a football coach at NC State. You had Bill Fairclough, was a football coach at Wake Forest. So for a small town, you had a lot of people you could look to in the sports industry. So early on, I wanted to be a coach. Went to North Carolina to play football, and the 3 years that I played there, I probably spent most of my time trying to be a coach, not a player, which is probably why I wasn't a very good player. But
it could have been other reasons.
It could have been other reasons. Might have been a step slow. But the way it worked out for me, you come in to play quarterback, and then once you can't throw, you become a receiver. And once you can't run, you become a defensive back. And once that doesn't work, they put me in the ticket office. And so that's where I kind of found my home, you know, in the sports world, was on the administrative side. So, you know, I went to graduate school, came back, lucky to come back and work at UNC for 12 years, both in the Rams Club and the athletic department. So,
let me stop you there. You didn't just go to grad school. You went to one of the best sports administration grad school programs in the country.
Best program in the world, Ohio University. Proud of that. And, yeah, you make a lot of good connections, and wasn't easy to get into, wasn't easy to stay there. But it's been a great family to be a part of for 33, 40 years.
And I'll just add one other thing, too, because we share this in common. I think which is how we first got connected. We're both graduates of the Sports Management Institute, which you went, I think you went through a couple of years before I did.
Yeah, early 92, 93 in those days. Yeah, those are, you know, great opportunities when you can spend 3 or 4 weeks throughout a year at the business school at Southern Cal or Notre Dame or UNC. Those are great. You know, those are great experiences to learn from your peers. And to sort of, at that point, you know, we'd all been out of school for a while. And so to go back, even in a small window, is really an important thing.
Yep.
Is that the Ohio that Roethlisberger went to? Is that the same Ohio? Where do you play football?
Bobcat?
He went to Miami of Ohio.
There you go.
Did he? He didn't go to
No, it was Miami. Yeah.
red instead of green.
Right. Yeah, the Bobcats haven't been greatly successful at football, but
no. They were okay when the Nebraska coach
Solich,
for a little while.
He was there for they were 1-10 when I was there. So
we're getting off track. All right, back to your background.
It's radio.
No, look, I grew up in this business on the consumer side of this, the fundraising side of this, selling to consumers. Really been fortunate from a lot of standpoints. So look, when I first got into the sports business, everything was manual. There were none of the technologies that we exist today. You sold a ticket to someone, they mostly paid you cash or they wrote you a check. No one gave you a credit card. Like that was like a foreign object, right? And so as the world changed, technologies come in, you know, so the computerization of it, you know, the internet took over probably around the late 90s, around 2000. The transactions that we think are normal today, you know, didn't exist in those days. And so you spent a lot of time, if you were, you know, I was in NASCAR at that time, and, you know, you worked for a company that said, hey, we want to be cutting edge. We want to be a leader. Well, to be a leader in those days, you really had to invest because that was the only way you were going to get there. Like the marketplace was not ready for what we were trying to do.
You know, one of the things that what you did at NASCAR which led you to some of the other things that you're doing and what you're doing now, as things started to become digitized, as money started to become available in these digital transactions, as you started to mine data and understand how to be efficient with marketing money, tell us about some of the things that you were doing before all of the cool apps and technology that you're working with today existed.
Yeah, look, you had to, the lesson that I've learned over 30 years of doing this is that you don't really control how a consumer comes to you. You can try to prod them, you can market your way to a certain way, but consumers are going to find you how they find you. And ultimately, as the 2000s kind of rolled in, everyone saw the internet as the future, but no one really knew how to accomplish that. A lot of companies tried to sell their products there, but there wasn't a presence to do it. There wasn't a way to advertise cleanly to do it. We were spending $15-20 million a year in advertising in NASCAR, but it was all traditional advertising. There was no digital. It was radio, TV, local TV, print, and radio. At the end of the day, the same fundamentals exist today that existed 30 years ago, in that you don't control how the consumer comes to you. You have to go try to find them in their space. Yeah. And so the social spaces of today are where you're finding those audiences. They're not watching. I remember 20 years ago buying a lot of local 6 o'clock newscasts. Think about that. Buying a lot of sitcoms at night. You would never do that today.
Right.
And that used to be the staple of media programs.
Yep.
Buying USA Today, a full page ad for the Daytona 500. You would never do that today.
Yeah.
And so, but those were staples 20 years ago.
We were in an early, I think it was the first episode, we were talking about this guy who I've mentioned before, Chuck Jarvie, and he used to tell us about back when we were in the 90s, right?
Oh, yeah.
He was saying, I grew up on this age of mass media and mass marketing. One day, very soon, you're not going to do that ever again, right? No. You're going to focus in on learning all you can of the data so you can figure out who it is that's a customer, and you're going to make products that are specifically for them, and they're going to be able to find exactly what they want. And that marriage of, efficiently targeting them and finding them and communicating with them is where everything's headed. And no question that's where we are now. I mean, we're drilling and drilling and drilling down to try to get to very, very specific information about customers who are also trying to drill their way into finding a specific solution to a problem that they have. And it's amazing how we can do that, and we can do it efficiently now. It used to be you had to spend so much money to figure that out. You had to spend mass media money. And now you can learn a lot with not. I mean, you've got to have some money, but you don't have to have anywhere near the money you used to have to be able to do that consumer target.
Well, what's
marketing.
amazing is that it's at your fingertips. We have the app that records everything, and you can look on it. It's real time, and you can see your conversion rate and the dashboard, and that's the neat thing for me is I've never done this. I was a medical sales guy, so we sold direct all the time. So to see that and be driving down the road and then see an update of data that is different from 5 minutes ago, I think that's just the neatest thing, and it's going to help drive what we want to do is by reaching a certain customer.
So let's go and you were walking through what you were doing, but I want to get to the part about where you started doing the whole e-commerce business around tickets, because that's kind of gets you into why this was relevant, and then we'll talk about what you thought when you heard BOA.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, that went back to the year 2000. I joined NASCAR. At those days, the International Speedway Company was a public company and just exponentially had grown. The sport was at the height that it had ever been. And so you were finding fans in all new quarters of the country. But not unlike a lot of businesses, there was a lot of consolidation. And so now you start buying racetrack properties around the country that are regionally close to each other but had been part of different groups. So now all of a sudden you aggregate 2 or 3 million customers across 14, 15 properties, and you don't know anything about these consumers. You don't know how much crossover you had. You don't know anything about their, what we call psychographics. You don't know anything about socioeconomic status. You don't know anything about trends. You just know who they are, right? And you were just happy that people, would come to your events. But if you're in a growth business, you've got to find more, right? I've got to find more John Pritchett's if I know who you are. And how do you do that? And so that was the beginning of the learnings, and like in a lot of spaces, what we wanted to do at the scale we wanted to do it, there were no providers in those days. The Ticketmasters you think of today, the big 800-pound gorilla could not do what we needed. And so you really had to say to yourself, okay, how do we do that? And then we sat down with, consultants for Walmart. I mean, like we went to learn from everybody we could learn from in the consumer space, who's doing it at scale. Like, what are they doing? Because that's what we want to do, right? We want to try to figure that out. And so we spent a number of years doing exactly that because we wanted to own the conversation with our consumer, but we wanted to know more about them. And so we started mixing in data. And we, it was funny that you don't think about it today, but the term data warehouse was a big word 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Like you didn't, like, what is that? And it was just a fancy way of saying, hey, we're going to aggregate all of this data around what our fans are doing. I worked in a sport where there were 200 Fortune 500 companies that touched that sport in some manner. So there's a lot of products, right? And so if you could kind of attach your fans to certain products and the loyalty, now you're learning more about the habits. And so, as a company, you're much more valuable, not just for the revenue that you generate from people coming through your gates, but what they represent to the marketplace in terms of how all the consumer brands touch them. So, we became a leader in that, and it really became a way, for us to expand, is because now we could understand our audience and now replicate that somewhere else.
Yeah. So how did you get it into this, the sort of the e-commerce ticket stuff that you've been doing? And I know you've been on the advisory board of the company, but tell us a little bit how you got into that, and then we'll progress into me calling you up to say, hey, there's this crazy idea I've got.
Well, so crazy, and so this is probably my 35th year in a row I've sold a ticket at some sporting event somewhere. So you've kind of seen the history of how these events work. I got out of the NASCAR space, got in the agency business, and saw it from another side. And then, eventually you exit. And then you say, okay, what do you want to do, professionally and personally for me? And so it became an opportunity to start consulting 7 years ago. So I touched a lot of ticketing spaces, a lot of marketing, sponsorship spaces, and because everyone is trying to figure out how to grow, technologies continue to change. Like even 5 years ago, no one really sold tickets using Facebook. Right? We think about Facebook as being an older platform now, but it's really a very recent phenomenon that people actually could monetize it. Build engagement, sure, but actually show conversions like we see today, that level, that didn't exist. Right? And so, luckily, as I look at myself as one of the old guard in that business, the more you attach to present day, the better off you always are, and maintain a lot of contacts. And a couple of years ago, I started, with the agency. We're talking about Fan IQ, seeing what they do different, right? You're showing that space is always evolving. And I've always said, and we've had a lot of conversations in the past about this, the event space has really been a learning ground for a lot of consumer companies because of the event nature of it. Is because it's one thing to say you have a product on sale that will always be on sale, but scarcity of time is really your problem, right? If I've got an event next week, I can't sell that event 2 weeks later, right? I have a window when I have to generate my revenue, or I'm not able to generate it, right? And so that time perspective really puts pressure on campaigns. And so you see now consumer brands like Nike, for example, has taken ownership of their customer, just like what we did 20 years ago. They're running more campaigns that are time ended for that very reason. They're trying to create a window of time where they can create more presence in the marketplace. They can drive up participation and try to hit revenue in a window. And so you're seeing now, I think, some of the learnings online from consumer companies that really we were doing 15 years ago. And so I think it's just a learning from each other.
Yeah. So you and I have talked about this a good bit because we both went through the Sports Management Institute. We both learned a lot about pricing from Jay Klompmaker. And, we learned that price is what someone is willing to pay at a particular time, right, for something. It's about the value that consumer perceives. And that's why you want to have a brand. And that's also why sometimes you want to do what you were just describing, which is to use the time-sensitive nature as an advantage because of the psychology of the freedom, the fear of loss, right? Right. That something, it's a disadvantage on the one hand because it will expire. And if you don't put a button seat, you get zero for that.
Exactly.
Right? But because it is also, the fear that someone may not be able, you may sell out, that you can use dynamic pricing and you can actually charge something different for them when it's 2 days out versus when it's 2 weeks out. So that's all. A lot of people have learned that you say dynamic pricing in the consumer packaged goods and in other industries that came out of the sporting goods industry and about selling tickets and learning how to do that in movie theaters and other things that are similar to that.
I will tell you, you'll learn more. We're in my days of working at UNC, for a long time, the Dean Smith Center was in the concert business. Had really nothing to do with athletics, but in those days, it was a primary concert venue for the state of North Carolina. You either went to a major tour came through, they'd go to Charlotte and they'd go to Chapel Hill, and that was it. And so what that opens you up to is all these different promoters would come in. Garth Brooks, the Grateful Dead, Sting, the Police, and you name a major act, James Taylor, you name Billy Joel, you name an act from the late 80s through the 90s, they came through there multiple times. And again, you see the cycles over and over again. You see how people price things. You see the advent of the dynamic pricing. You see the scaling, of it. All those fundamentals, it's all about positioning, right? And at the end of the day, those old B school fundamentals we talk about from sports management days apply everywhere, right? It's all about pricing, packaging, and positioning are the three most important things you can do, no matter what you're doing.
And you do that. You talk about dynamic pricing, and the nomenclature that I've used is I've always tried to say, how can we create a sense of urgency? And that's what I've tried to do with BOA, is create that sense of urgency. And it's hard to do with a lot of products, because there's so much clutter out there and various things. Ticketing is nice because you have a window, an event date. So with other consumer products, it's not the easiest thing to do, and I think that's an advantage we're going to have.
You get feedback on if you hit the market or not, right? And that's the other thing, is that when you can do, one of the things I learned about being in the NASCAR space was scale, because if you work at one company or one team or one venue, you may have one or two campaigns a year, but when you do it at scale and you have 30 or 40 campaigns a year, you really get to see the cycles, and you do that over a number of years, and you really accelerate the learning. Because we talked about data before, but you really have to. You can get a lot of data in a lot of industries. The real key to this as a marketer is how do you use it, right? And where does that take you? And you may not get all your learnings in the first cycle that you use it. So it's being able to see it multiple times is where you get the advantage of really the scale there. So
let's talk about the call. I made a call to Darren.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, Darren, I got this friend Hank. He's had a bunch of successful exits. He's really unique thinker. I think he's got a great idea. He's seeing around the corner. He's solving a big problem. I'm going to take the leap and join in and run the company. I'm going to put a team together. We're going to raise capital. Here are my thoughts. And then I said, I remember that you're a cyclist, and so I want to run this by you. What do you think of this idea? And so I just basically described what BOA is, which we've described in some episodes, so we don't have to go into that. Yeah. What was your initial reaction? Do you remember?
Can I say hell yes? Because that's really what you really hit a mark for me. And two quick sidebars on that. I mentioned briefly that I played football in North Carolina. So the fall of 1983, I was a freshman, and we had a nice string of 100-degree days in Chapel Hill, and I decided to collapse in one of them after a practice. Because really you're 18 years old and you really don't think about Gatorade or water or salt tablets or anything else. You're just trying to prove your worth on as a freshman on in those days a top 10 football team. And I collapsed. The next thing you know, I'm on a training table with IVs in both arms and bags of ice on top of me and trainers and doctors and EMTs, and I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on. But I learned, after walking out of there that, hey, I don't want to do that again. Let's try a better way. And you mentioned the cycling. Yes, is later on, I got hooked on it, and I got into it and went over to France and did a couple of races, and one of them concluded on the famous iconic mountain Alpe d'Huez. And you'd watch that over the years as a fan of the Tour de France, and you saw Lance Armstrong go up that mountain. You saw Greg LeMond in a famous race in the 80s. And you're like, this is an iconic place. I got up that mountain, and I was right back in that bad state again. No matter how well I trained or planned, I've got to go up a 10-mile mountain, and it's 90 degrees, and you're at the physical limit. And I remember sitting down on the wall at one of the famous hairpin turn switchbacks, and I thought to myself, gosh, this is 30 years later, and we're still no better at this. I'm out here as a mere mortal struggling, and I'm trying to figure out gels and bananas and drinks and anything else I can to get myself up the rest of the way of this mountain, which I did. But you think, okay, there's got to be a better way. Like we've got to be better at the nutrition side of these sports. And as soon as you told me what you were doing, I thought to myself, I hate gels. You've just turned you've just turned me into a fan in terms of what you're trying to do as a company from a sports side, right? And then you look at it from the marketing side, you're like, wait a minute, you've got something unique here. You've got something that you can really have fun with. You can turn into a great company. You've got it's scalable. So you take up all the business principles, right? And so it's very rarely, we talked about the ticketing side of my business, but it has passed. But I've spent an equal amount of time on the business development side of this, from an agency side or from a public company side. So I've looked at a lot of companies. I've looked at a lot of ideas and tried to say, hey, look, as an agency or as a company, could we buy this and make this scalable? So I've seen a lot of business plans, and I had seen very few that resonated as quickly as this one did.
Yeah, no, appreciate that feedback. So, one of the things that Hank and I talked about before is that he's created some great products. He's had some nice exits. The magic is kind of understanding where the market's heading, understanding what you're capable of doing, particularly in an innovative, disruptive way that other people haven't thought about. And that's really kind of one of Hank's gifts.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's happened in those companies is they haven't necessarily been able to really scale that business and find the customers. And, that's, as Hank will say, that's not his expertise. You and I have been selling stuff, marketing stuff, for a long, long time. So that kind of gets into, we don't know how to do what he does, and he doesn't know how to do what we do. And so it's actually...
That's why you have a seat at the table.
That's exactly right. That's why you got to get people that don't do what you do, right? You got to surround yourself with people that don't do what you do.
Exactly.
In order to be successful. And so thinking about where we're going now, the go-to-market strategy, to kind of transitioning into that, if you think about the thing, I want you just to kind of to provide some commentary about what you're doing here, we've been doing, what you're thinking about, and kind of how this strategy integrates. So we've done some sponsorship partnerships, and you and I have spent a lot of time around both buying and selling sponsorship, partnerships. Yeah. We've got a digital media campaign, which we just spent a little bit of time talking about, that has to have really good creative. We've got a social media campaign with influencers, which we haven't implemented yet because we're still building that. Mm-hmm. We've got these various team channels, so selling directly into teams and organizations, which is another channel, and also kind of another marketing channel in addition to being a revenue and sales channel. And then eventually we'll have some additional endorsers. We have some users now, and we have some people who are advisors, but we don't really have kind of the celebrity endorser yet. But as you think about what we're doing and all of those pieces, kind of tell us what you've been working on and what you think the future looks like when BOA starts to mature and gain customers and grow as a brand.
Yeah, that's pretty wide ranging. I would say the first thing that we said when we looked at this was less about the tactics, but more about the strategy of we want to own the relationship with our customer. Like we wanted to be a direct-to-consumer company right out of the gate. There's a lot of reasons to do that, but one, you want to control the messaging with your consumer, not quickly just go to a wholesale or retail strategy where, look, I think ultimately BOA will succeed at retail, both in the convenience store world and a specialty retail store running cycling stores. I think there's a lot of retail applications for this product. But when you're there, you're ultimately not in control of your relationship with your customer. And I would say to you, and we've mentioned some big brands in the past, they all started sort of in the brick and mortar world or, with retail partners, and they're all trying now to own that relationship. And I'm a huge proponent of owning the relationship first, understanding your customer, understanding what they need, understanding their frequency. Because if you just go the retail route, all you're really learning is how many units someone sold today. I don't really have any idea how John Pritchett got to me or what he's doing with the product or how he bought it or anything, right? I just know you went to a retail store and bought the product. So that was very important. That's not easy to do though, right? So you've got to depend on your marketing and your messaging to drive customer one, right? Because you can have customer 100,000 down the road, but you've got to figure out how to get customer one. In a digital world, you've got to be able to attract that customer on a social platform on your phone. So you have to really think about everything you do to what it looks like basically on an iPhone. And so to get someone's attention, you have to stop them in their feed. I've said this for the last 10 years in a lot of realms in terms of how you advertise. You have to, we all scroll, right? But if you're going to get someone's attention, you have to stop them in the scroll. And I think you see the creative that we put out that we're all a part of is doing
BOA or nothing.
It's BOA or nothing. Right. It's a little provocative, but it's doing exactly that. And that's the very first step. Been a lot of positive comments online, which, you get a lot of comments online, but a lot of them, this is a really great ad. It stopped me. I watched it 3 times. And
you can't disrupt and be innovative sort of quietly and modestly, right?
No.
You're exactly right. If you want to change behavior and get people to pay attention to you, you got to stop them in their feed. That's a good way to say it.
You have to stop them in their feed. But then you have to back it up with good information, right? Because if they're really interested past being stopped in their feed, look, you serve them an ad because they fit a profile anyway. So you've done a little bit of homework on your targeting to find the right audience, which we've spent a lot of time trying to determine that, which a lot of companies do. But first you got to stop them, and then becomes the next phase. Okay, they come to your site, they may learn something. Look, they may just abandon and go on about their day. But you've stopped them. They've made a connection. We were already seeing signs of people coming back for multiple visits. So we know that part. Just consumer habits in general. You never really know while someone comes to your site and then leaves, right? So your goal is to try to get them back. And the retargeting that we've done then takes on a little different tact, right? It comes back to say, maybe in our case, it's more of a science message. Like, what is BOA? How does it work? Because invariably, we're changing 30 years of habits here of how athletes take on nutrients. And I think the feedback that we've all had when we've talked to someone in person at some of the events that we've done is that they get it in 10 seconds. Like, wait a minute, I didn't understand that. Wow, we can do this. Like, you can spray this in your mouth and you get it 10 times faster. They're like, yes, we'll take this. And so that's what you have to replicate in an informal online setting where you can't have the one-to-one conversation. You've got to create a medium in front of them that actually does that for you. And that's kind of the next step that we're taking now.
Right. And so you can't just you can, but it's more difficult and more expensive to just do it with digital media, right? So you've got to have platforms, right, where you can leverage the relationship with the community that the community you're trying to reach into and offer a solution trusts, right? Yeah. So talk a little bit about some of the sponsorship stuff we've done and what else we'll be doing as we go to market.
Look, and this is part of our history is, being on the other side, years and years of selling sponsorships and then being an agency and being a buyer of sponsorships. One of the things that you learn, particularly in the sports industry, is that if you get a good team partnership or a good venue partnership, they have really good audiences. Just like I told you, we spent a lot of money at NASCAR trying to figure out, what our audience looked like. That was very valuable to us in a sponsorship conversation with a CPG company. We had a long, our company had a 40-year relationship, 50-year relationship with Pepsi. One of the reasons that they coveted that relationship is because the summer window of the Daytona race in July was all about their summer programming. And they spent a lot of money trying to figure out how we as a NASCAR space could help drive their summer programming. And they did it because of the audience. And so now you get to where we are as a brand and you say, okay, I'm in a sports product. How can I go attach to audiences that fit what I'm trying to do to accelerate that customer acquisition curve, which is really what you're trying to do here. So yes, there's a component of this. It's a digital play, but it's why we sought to, once we identified the endurance space, number one, and secondly, more specifically, the triathlon space, because of the need there. You really want to go to the governing body, who has, everyone who participates in a sanctioned race in the United States has to be a USA Triathlon member, right? So there's an officialness to that. There's an audience attached to them who's participating, who's very interested in this space, or they wouldn't be a member. And so it really helps you accelerate, the customer acquisition curve. You can't do just one or the other, or you can, but it's a lot harder. But if you do it in concert, we've seen it time and time again in the past that's where the sweet spot is.
So now we're also working on product development. We've spent some time talking about some future products like our fuel product and the Perform product. And Hank runs as our Chief Innovation Officer our whole product development process. And Darren, even though he's the Chief Revenue Officer, he also has his hand in the product development process because he has experienced the problem we're trying to solve. So it's actually really valuable
both
to
hands,
have him in the process.
Both hands sometimes.
Is that a nice way of saying I was in the way?
You said both hands sometimes. But, I'll tell you the one thing that's neat about this. Sometimes you get in a company, you say supply chain issues, whatever. You take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The thing I like about what we're doing is right now we're taking about 6 steps forward and 1 step back. So we're making great progress in the little bit of time. But it's the team. It's the team that's doing that. So,
well, like anything else, particularly when you're a startup, but anything you try to do, you're going to run into problems. You're going to have hurdles. You're going to have brick walls. And as long as you're saying, okay, acknowledge a problem, how do we go around it? How do we go under it? How do we go through it? How do we substitute it? How do we recalibrate and keep going? Because you're not going to have a trajectory that's smooth. You're going to have dips and you're going to have accelerations. And you just have to constantly say, okay, I hate that. And, after you chew somebody's ass a little bit, then you figure out, okay, that didn't work. Now, how do we solve this?
Yeah, no.
So, all right, we're working on the budget, which also is a constant. Working on 2022. I keep asking Darren to finish the revenue projections, and he keeps telling me soon.
It's a moving target.
You get as much data as you can in order to make the most educated guess you can, and that's all it is.
That's what it is.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Unless you work for Bill France, and then it better be damn exact. So,
once they get to a point, I bet it was exact with those guys.
And so we are continuing to raise capital as an early stage company, and good news that we continue to have the resources that we need to grow the business at scale and to develop products and to, most importantly, develop consumers and convert those consumers. You mentioned something early. I'm sorry, Hank. You mentioned something early, Darren, about building that community directly and owning that relationship. That is so important because, the lifetime value of customers in the space that we're in should not be ignored. You can do one transaction, but if you build a community of people who find value in the brand and the service and want to be a part of it, that customer can be worth thousands and thousands of dollars to you, not only in what they spend with you, but how they talk about you and introduce you to other communities.
Oh, look, I don't think there's any question. Look, I was very lucky that my first job out of school was to work in fundraising, collegiate fundraising. And that there's an industry that will teach you about one-to-one marketing that became a buzzword and now it's kind of cycled away. It's that because, and the other thing they'll teach you is you never know. I can't tell you how many times we had donors who for a number of years had given us $50 a year or $100 a year, was sort of a minimum contribution to kind of be a member, right? And it's easy to make an assumption if someone is just given in that quantity when there are people giving tens of thousands of dollars a year that they may never be a major donor. You never knew who was going to walk in the next day and write you a big check, right? Because now there's something. And so you learn really quickly not to make any kind of assumptions about that stuff and you're only going to know that if you're involved, right? You can't be third party to that. And so you've got to have that relationship and own that relationship to know that. And so it applies to everything you do, right? And that's why it's always been important to me, no matter what company we're in, is to own the conversation with our customer.
Yeah, in the fundraising, you're talking about all those guys at Clemson who took my parking spots. They'd come in and write a bigger check. All of a sudden, I'd have a longer walk to get to the stadium.
Well, you learn about loyalty. You learn about loyalty to people, and just a lot of business lessons in that you learn about follow up, right? You learn about the minor thing that you maybe to you sometimes, but it's a major thing to a customer, what you do for them. Like we shipped a can to a customer today who's got a race tomorrow, right? He wasn't supposed to get that can for another week or so, but No, we're going to get it to him and see if he wins.
So there's a great book, there's a series of books Harry Beckwith wrote called The Invisible Touch, and he talks about polishing the anchors. And I've read this 20 years ago probably. Great series of books, all about what you're talking about. Like you have to polish the anchors at every point of experience, at every touch point that a customer has with you. Like, how do you make the right impression with them? How do you show them that you care about what their issue is, what their problem is? That's not easy to do at scale. Like that to your whole one-to-one. But you have to learn how to do that by using the technology to help you do it.
The technology is your friend.
But those are the things that build, the word you said, Darren, was loyalty. And that's what the universities have. They have loyalty, so people are willing to donate the money or write the check. And that's, we talked today about Black Rifle Coffee and the merger that happened today. And it's because they have a loyal customer base. And that's what at BOA, we want to try to build that loyalty.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the Black Rifle Coffee guys in 7 years built this community of users. Now, honestly, there's nothing about the coffee that is necessarily disruptively better than any other kinds of coffee. Yeah, everybody's got their opinion about coffee. What they built was a community of people who believe in what they believe, no matter where you are on the spectrum. You can build communities around all sorts of issues. They built a big community and a loyal following, and people want to be a part of that community, and they use that brand. They buy that product, they wear those shirts because they want others to know that's a real brand. I've got loyalty. That and doing that. So the advantage that, say, a Clemson has is Clemson is a government monopoly, right? So they're not going to have any competition. The guys that built that brand, the coffee brand, built it out of zero without any help from the government, without any monopoly, without any, it built that themselves. That's pretty remarkable to do this transaction. Was it $1.7 billion valuation?
$1.7 billion in a competitive field. You walk into the grocery store, you drive down the street, you pass 5 or 6 coffee shops in almost any town. So, yeah,
great example.
It's going to be a great case study.
So, last thing, we want to take people on this journey, Darren. So that's the whole point of the podcast, right? And to kind of share what's going on and let people in on it. And also, we want to hopefully be a service to people that are starting companies and young entrepreneurs. And, we've all been on this planet for quite a few cycles. And so hopefully we can, the things we've learned, hard lessons, expensive lessons, and fruitful lessons, we want to share that and talk about what's going on in BOA every week. So one of the big things that happened this week is we opened up a new channel. We entered into a relationship with a representative company that will be taking us directly into colleges and universities and pro teams and high schools as well. And what I like about that is it not only is a channel for revenue, someone who can take us into a channel that they have. It allows us to do that without us taking on additional burden in terms of salary and the expenses related to that, because we're tapping into somebody that's been doing that for a long period of time. But more importantly is it's going to allow us to have exposure to athletes to give us more feedback and to get more trial of product. And eventually, when we get the usage that we know we're going to get, because we've had enough of these trials to know how people react to BOA. Yeah. People all, universally have been saying, man, I can't go without this. This solves a problem. I love it. It tastes great. And how do I get more? So we think we're going to have the same thing. But what I love about it is that this channel will allow us to do that and to sort of create another marketing channel or, maybe publicity channel, if you will, that we don't necessarily have to pay for. So that's an exciting step for us. It doesn't necessarily generate revenue for us today, but long term, I think it's a wise decision and will pay off for us.
I don't think there's any question. And look, the one thing that you guys may have talked about it before, but this is a really, really good product. And when you come out of the gate with a lot of things, whether it's a new company or an older company creating a new product, a lot of times the first thing you have to try to figure out is it any good? Like, we can say the marketing's really good, but is the product any good? And we know enough now over the last 6 months of using the product, I can tell you personally, this product is really, really good. And what those types of relationships allow us to do is let the product tell its own story. Because once you put it in front of a lot of elite athletes, like what's going to happen with all of these college trials, the product's going to tell its own story. They're going to be successful with it, and that's only going to help us going forward. We're going to create a lot of good relationships with a lot of schools. It may create marketing opportunities. If we're all successful, it will, both for the schools and now through NCAA rule changes, it can be profitable for the athletes. So there's a lot of good opportunities here. But yeah, what you're speaking to is how you scale a company. You try to figure out. We've talked about omni-channel and a lot of things from an advertising standpoint, but from a sales standpoint, the same term applies. And so having this sort of institutional route is a really smart idea for this company and this product, because it allows you to scale really quickly at a low sort of cost burden for the company.
Well, we'll have another episode, another podcast will be dedicated to nothing but NIL discussion. But
yeah, we'll do that for another day.
Yeah. I'll tell you, my observation of the day, too, was we sit here and you talk about, it was nice to hear Darren's take on how the ticketing world has evolved and sponsorship. And then we sit around and we talk about how sports nutrition has evolved, or how sports equipment has evolved. And Darren kept going back and saying, well, 20 years ago, we did it this way, and 20 years ago we did it that way. Well, when I was growing up, say in the late 70s and 80s, we would watch documentaries and it would say, well, back at the turn of the century, these are things that happened. But now, when he says 20 years ago, that was basically the turn of the century. So now we can say, back at the turn of the century, this is how we did it. So, Darren, you can use that term, turn of the century from now on.
I like that. Yeah. Is that a nicer way of saying old?
We're old. That's a nice way of saying we're old. John called us old last week. So
2 weeks ago, I think.
2 weeks ago, he called us
I'm not old. I just started when I was 12. That's how I say this.
He called us old. But John and I said we're going to be the oldest guys in the company.
Look, the goal here is for you to be able to buy a suite that gives you a vast array of parking spaces closer to the stadium.
Closer to Clemson Stadium,
Clemson.
And they can win some football games too.
We'll know we've succeeded when he's got a suite, right?
Yeah, and we can have an NIL deal and get a good quarterback.
Wow.
Sorry,
Speaking
number
of
5.
NIL.
Sorry, number 5.
Sorry, Dr. Pepper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a good tease for another podcast. Darren, thanks for joining us, and obviously, thanks for the great work that you're doing. Get back to it, will you?
Exactly.
Good stuff, Darren. Good stuff.
Hank, anything you want to add? I mean, you spent, just a little while ago, we had a phone call with talking about formulation going on with future products. And one of the things I love about this company is we're always talking to other people, that are doing other things, trying to figure out, how to get better and getting their expertise and asking them weird questions like Darren did today to try to push the envelope to see what's possible.
That's it.
Well, the nice thing, the nice feedback I get what makes me excited is when I talk to people and I kind of can tell they wish they were us. They wish they were doing what we're doing because they see that we've hit on something that is trending in the right direction and has big potential. The other thing you talked earlier about capital raise, and we have been successful and had a good week talking with people this week. And you always look at the caliber of the people you bring in and the people that are attracted to your deals. And we continue to bring in real quality people that are real value added guys that are going to help us grow this company. So that really, really gets me excited. And as I say, it's just been an amazing ride so far because every week it's just getting more activity and more activity. And, here John will give me a call at 10:15 at night. And, my wife will say, well, do you guys ever stop? And I say, well, we're growing this thing, so we're not going to stop.
Yeah, that's for people that may be listening that are trying to build a company or hope to build a company. There isn't a shortcut. How many times do we talk a day? 10 times a day.
Yeah.
And starts first thing in the morning we're talking, late in the evening we're talking. And it's true with Darren too. And just what you have to do. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be balanced and you shouldn't put a priority to the most important things in your life, which is not your business. But if you want to be successful with the business and give you the things that you want to do to help others or to help your family, and you got to be at it. You got to keep going at it.
I'm texting Mallory at 6:30 trying to buy temporary tattoos. She's bathing her little boys, bathing the kids. But she called me back and she said, "I'm on it. We'll get you the temporary tattoos." Right. So everybody's doing it.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap on episode 3. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Again, it was a blast.